Imagine getting pulled over for no reason, then being forced to do push-ups on the freezing ground. Sounds unreal. It happened. The night was cold. The kind of cold that cut through even the thickest layers, creeping into your bones and making every breath feel sharp. Danielle Preston sat behind the wheel of her black Lexus RX, rubbing her hands together as she waited at a red light. She was exhausted. It had been a long day at her restaurant, Preston's Table, a place she had built from the ground up. Managing a full staff, dealing with last-minute cancellations, and making sure her customers were happy. It was the kind of grind she loved, but it drained every ounce of energy she had. She checked the clock. 12:42 a.m. Almost home. The streets of Indianapolis were empty, save for the occasional headlights in the distance. She adjusted the volume on her stereo, letting the low hum of Jill Scott fill the quiet. Her heated seats were the only thing keeping her from shivering. Then, flashing lights. Red and blue illuminated her rearview mirror. She frowned, glancing at her speedometer. 34 in a 35. She wasn't swerving. No sudden stops. No reason, at least none that made sense, to be pulled over. Her stomach tensed. She signaled and eased her car onto the shoulder of the road. The lights followed. Taking a deep breath, she reached into her glove compartment, pulling out her registration and insurance. Her hands were steady, but her pulse wasn't. She had been here before. Not often, but enough. Her window was already cracked open when two officers approached. One of them, a tall, heavy-set man with a thick Midwestern accent, leaned down first. His name tag read, Deputy Mark Stevens. License and registration. His voice was flat. No greeting, no explanation. Just an order. Danielle handed them over, keeping her other hand visible on the wheel. Can I ask why I'm being stopped, officer? The second cop, a shorter woman with sharp eyes and blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, shifted her stance. Officer Jennifer Crowley. You were driving a little erratic back there, Crowley said. Any reason for that? Danielle's eyebrows pulled together. I wasn't driving erratic. I just got off work. I was heading home. Where do you work? Danielle exhaled through her nose. I own a restaurant. Preston's Table, downtown. Stevens smirked. That right? Big shot business owner. Danielle didn't like the way he said it. I need you to step out of the vehicle. Her stomach dropped. For what? Crowley rested a hand on her belt. Ma'am, step out of the car. Danielle swallowed, looking between the two. There was no point in arguing. She unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly pushed the door open. The cold slapped her immediately, biting at her skin through her coat. Stevens motioned for her to stand by the trunk. Hands where we can see them. She did as told. The quiet of the night made everything feel louder, her breath, her heartbeat, the hum of the police radio in the background. Crowley circled her car, shining a flashlight into the back seat. You been drinking tonight? No. You sure? Danielle clenched her jaw. Yes. Stevens crossed his arms. Your eyes look a little glassy. Maybe you're under something else. A lump formed in her throat. This was going exactly the way she feared it would. I'm not under anything, she said, her voice even. Crowley stepped forward. You know, you're acting a little defensive. That's usually what people do when they have something to hide. Danielle exhaled slowly, trying to keep her temper in check. I don't have anything to hide. But they weren't listening, and she knew where this was going. But she had no idea just how far they were going to take it. Danielle stood still, the night air slicing through her coat like it wasn't even there. Her fingers curled into her palms, but she forced herself to keep her breathing steady. She had done nothing wrong. Officer Crowley tapped her flashlight against her palm, studying Danielle like she was sizing her up. You work in a restaurant, huh? She said, voice casual. What do you do there? Danielle's jaw tightened. I own it. Crowley raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you're the boss? Deputy Stevens chuckled, shaking his head. Bet you don't like people telling you what to do then. Danielle didn't answer. She wasn't playing their game. Crowley took a step closer. I'm gonna pat you down. Just a routine check. Danielle felt her stomach flip. For what? I'm not carrying anything illegal. Stevens smirked. So you are carrying something? Danielle's eyes snapped to his, heat rising in her chest. That's not what I said. But it didn't matter. Crowley had already grabbed her by the wrist, turning her roughly towards the car. Danielle clenched her teeth as cold hands ran down her sides, over her pockets, pressing into her jeans. The humiliation burned more than the cold. Cars passed by in the distance, headlights cutting through the dark. Not a single one slowed down. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. Crowley stepped back. You check out. Danielle turned around, crossing her arms over her chest for warmth. Can I go now? Stevens rubbed his chin, pretending to think. You're acting real impatient, almost disrespectful. Danielle's stomach twisted. Here it comes. Crowley sighed, like she was disappointed. You know, I think maybe you need a lesson in compliance. Danielle's pulse slammed against her ribs. Excuse me? Stevens grinned. Drop down. Give me 20. A sharp laugh escaped her lips. What? Crowley folded her arms. Push-ups. Right now. Danielle let out a breath of disbelief. I'm not doing that. Stevens shrugged. All right then. We can take this another route. I can say you refused a sobriety test. We impound the car. Maybe book you for resisting. Danielle's stomach dropped. She looked at them both, searching for even a hint that this was a joke, that at any moment they'd laugh, say they were messing with her and let her go. But their faces were stone. They were dead serious. She glanced around. The street was empty. No one was coming to help. It was just her and them. Her body burned with anger. But what was she supposed to do? Argue? That wouldn't end well. Fight? That would end even worse. She had one choice. Without a word, Danielle dropped to the freezing pavement. Her palms met the icy concrete, biting through her skin. She grit her teeth and started counting. 1, 2. Stevens whistled. Look at that. She listens. Crowley chuckled. Maybe she isn't as entitled as I thought. Danielle's arms shook. The cold was merciless, shooting pain through her fingers and up into her wrists. But she refused to stop. 10. 11. She could hear them talking above her, laughing. Her blood boiled, but she wouldn't let them see it. 15. 16. Her breath turned sharp, coming out in puffs of air. Her body ached, but she pushed through it. 18. 19. 20. She got up slowly, locking eyes with Stevens. Her breathing was heavy, her muscles burning, but she wouldn't let them see her break. Can I go now? Her voice was flat. Stevens tilted his head like he was considering it. Then he waved a lazy hand. Yeah, get out of here. Danielle turned on her heel, forcing herself not to run back to her car. She got in, shut the door, and locked it. Her fingers shook as she reached for the wheel. The two officers stood there, watching her, smirking. She swallowed, forcing herself to take one last steady breath before she pulled off. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. She never wanted to see their faces again. But this wasn't over. Danielle gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. Her whole body felt like it was on fire, but not from the cold. It was the rage, the humiliation, the complete powerlessness she had just felt on that street. She should have said something. She should have refused. She should have... No. She knew exactly what would have happened if she had pushed back, and it wouldn't have ended with her driving home. The soft glow of streetlights passed over her face as she sped through the quiet streets of Indianapolis. She wasn't even sure how she had made it home. One moment she was on the pavement, pressing her shaking hands into the ice. The next, she was pulling into the driveway of her 3-bedroom home in Carmel. She cut the engine and sat there. What just happened? Her chest was still rising and falling too fast. Her fingers were still trembling. Her knees ached from the pavement. She flexed her hands, rubbing warmth back into them, but it didn't help. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. A message from her best friend, Tasha. Tasha. You good? Long night? Danielle didn't even know how to respond. Did she say, "No, I'm not good. I just got harassed by 2 cops who thought humiliating me was funny"? She swallowed. Her eyes flicked to the small black camera mounted on her dashboard. The dash cam. Her pulse kicked up again. With stiff fingers, she reached forward and pressed the button to rewind the footage. The small screen lit up, and there it was. All of it. The flashing lights, the officers' smug faces. The moment she was forced onto the ground like a damn criminal. She could hear them. Their voices dripping with condescension. The threats, the laughter. Danielle's hands curled into fists. It wasn't just her memory now. It wasn't just her word against theirs. It was real, and she had proof. For a second, she hesitated. She had been through this before. Maybe not to this extreme, but she knew how these stories usually ended. A complaint. An internal investigation. Officers getting a slap on the wrist, nothing actually changing. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Not this time. Danielle grabbed her phone and opened her contacts. She scrolled past family, past staff, past friends, until she stopped on one name. Gregory Fields, her lawyer. She hit dial, because she wasn't about to let this slide, and she sure as hell wasn't about to let them get away with it. Danielle sat in her car, listening to the dial tone, her heart pounding like she had just run a marathon. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then, "Danielle, you all right?" Gregory Fields had been her lawyer for the past 5 years. A sharp, no-nonsense man who didn't waste time with small talk. If she was calling him at 1:17 a.m., he knew it wasn't for anything minor. Danielle swallowed hard. "I need you to look at something." There was a beat of silence. Then, in that calm, measured tone of his, Gregory asked, "What happened?" She pressed her lips together, staring at the dashcam screen, watching herself, her own body, on the ground, doing push-ups at gunpoint. Her voice was tight when she answered. "Cops pulled me over. No reason. Made me get out. Frisked me. Then..." She exhaled, pressing her fingers against her temple. "Then they made me do push-ups on the pavement." Another silence, but this one was heavier. "You have it on video?" Danielle's grip tightened on the phone. Every second. Gregory exhaled through his nose. She could almost see him rubbing his chin, eyes narrowing in the way they did when he was piecing something together. "Send it to me now. Don't post it. Don't say anything. Let me handle it." She didn't need to be told twice. She pulled up the footage and sent the full file. The moment it finished uploading, Gregory spoke again. "Listen to me carefully." Danielle straightened, already knowing this was serious. "Do not delete anything. Not the original, not the backup, nothing. I'm calling in some favors first thing in the morning. We're not just going after them, Danielle. We're making sure this goes beyond a slap on the wrist." Her breath hitched. "You really think we can—" "Danielle." Gregory's voice was firm. They messed with the wrong person. She closed her eyes. She had money, power, influence. She was on the police oversight committee for the city. That meant these officers had no clue who they had just humiliated. That was their first mistake. And their second? Thinking she was going to stay quiet about it. But the storm was just getting started. The sun had barely risen when Danielle's phone buzzed again. She hadn't slept, not really. She had laid in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. But now it was game time. She grabbed her phone. "Gregory." She answered immediately. "Tell me you have something." His voice was sharper than before. "Oh, I have something. More than something." Danielle sat up. "Talk to me." Gregory exhaled, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "I sent the footage to a few key people before the department could try to bury it. The mayor's office saw it. The chief saw it. And guess what?" Danielle's heart slammed against her ribs. "Both of those officers? They're done." She sucked in a breath. Wait. Fired? Already?" "Not yet. But the chief is scrambling. The mayor's demanding answers. This isn't something they can sweep under the rug, Danielle." His voice lowered, heavy with meaning. "Especially not when one of their own committee members was the victim." Danielle ran a hand down her face. It was happening. She swung her legs out of bed, pacing the room. "So what now?" Gregory didn't hesitate. "Press conference at noon. They're trying to get ahead of it, but I doubt it'll help. This is going viral, Danielle. It's bigger than just a couple of rogue cops." Her stomach twisted, not with fear, but with the weight of what this meant. She walked over to her window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. "Do you think they regret it?" Gregory let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, they will." Danielle's phone buzzed again. Her notifications were flooding in. Messages, missed calls, social media exploding with discussions about police abuse, racial profiling and power trips. People were already talking about her case, and she hadn't even said a word yet. She clicked one of the news alerts. Breaking. Indianapolis Police Department under fire. After dashcam video surfaces. She inhaled sharply. It was real. It was happening. And by the end of the day, those officers would be jobless. But this fight wasn't just about them anymore. By noon, the press conference was everywhere. Danielle sat in her office at Preston's table, watching the live stream on her laptop. The Indianapolis police chief, Robert Langley, stood stiffly at the podium, his jaw clenched like he had swallowed something bitter. "The actions of Deputy Stevens and Officer Crowley do not reflect the values of this department." His voice was measured, controlled. "Effective immediately, both officers have been terminated from duty." Danielle leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It was done. The same two officers who had laughed at her, humiliated her, held power over her for no reason other than because they could, were now stripped of their own power. But as she stared at the screen, listening to the carefully worded apology, something inside her told her this wasn't enough. Because for every case like hers that got justice, how many more were there that didn't? How many people had been stopped just like she was, humiliated, abused, but had no dashcam footage? No lawyer ready to fight for them? No connections to force accountability? Her fingers tapped against the desk. This couldn't just end here. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gregory. "Gregory, we did what we set out to do, but I have a feeling you're not done yet." Danielle smirked. He was right. She closed her laptop and stood up, her reflection staring back at her from the restaurant's glass windows. She wasn't just a business owner. She wasn't just a committee member. She was someone who had been silenced before, and refused to be silenced again. This wasn't just about her. This was about making sure no one else had to go through what she did. She picked up her phone and started dialing. Because this was just the beginning. How many times have stories like this happened, but never made it to the headlines? How many people have been mistreated and had no way to fight back? It's not just about one case. It's about the system that allows it to keep happening. If you see something, record it. Speak up. Demand accountability. Change doesn't happen by staying silent. What do you think? Should more people be using their influence to fight back against abuse of power? Drop your thoughts in the comments.